Thank you, Angeline. Okay, so welcome everybody to this session on intersectionality. We're really happy to have you here. As Angeline mentioned, if you want to share with us why you decided to join particularly for this webinar, it would be really interesting to hear your opinions. You can drop that on the chat box. My name is Monica, and today we're going to be talking about intersectionality. So for some, intersectionality is considered that rather than being more like a separate feminist topic, it should be considered like a framework that infiltrates all areas of feminist thoughts and analysis. And today we're gonna start by talking a little bit about the history of intersectionality, how the concept was generated in within Black feminist thought, and how it has developed and be in its use in different contexts today. We would try to have like different perspectives of how it is used in research and also in day-to-day life basis in very interesting projects. And today we have 4 speakers that are joining us, and I really want to thank them to kind of participate in this event and to share your knowledge, your thoughts, your experiences. Particularly, thank you for those who are connecting from a different time zone and had to wake up really early. And yeah, so the idea is to kind of stimulate the debate about the concept of intersectionality in feminist thoughts, and to have like a really nourishing discussion on the controversies that are already exist on the debate and how, for instance, intersectionality can be crossed with decolonizing feminist approaches. To make this short, I'm just going to pass, I will pass in a minute the word to Victoria and to Andrea so she can present Victoria. But regarding the questions, Josie will be keeping your questions. We will ask you to please send your questions. The idea is like to stimulate debate. So any questions, any doubts, any concepts that you would like to know more, you can either write a question and save it for the end. At the end, we will have a 30-minute question and answer session, or you can send it on the chat box and Josie will keep it, will keep an eye on all of the questions. One thing, if you want to keep your questions anonymous, just send it directly to Josie Horton, so she can like just read your question. And I think for now, that's all. Welcome to the intersectionality webinar. And I'll pass you the microphone, Andrea, so you can introduce us, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Monica. It's really nice to be here today and to be with all of you and to see the interest in this topic. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Victoria Shawamni, who is from University College London. Victoria has a long-standing interest in intersectionality, and I know very strong views about intersectionality and its use and its development, which was one of the reasons we wanted her to talk here, was to help us stimulate debate about it. So we hope that you find her talk both provocative and interesting. Victoria is, with me, joint convener of the Gender and Education Network for the European Education Research Association. We're joint deputy conveners. So if you're interested in that organisation, please do get in touch with us, because we'd like more people who are interested in intersectionality. We have been trying to generate an edited collection proposal for some time, and we're not getting enough papers. So we would like that to happen. And Victoria is also equality lead for the Gender and Education Association, and she's on the executive of that, as well as involved in BELMAS and the American Education Research Association as well. So if you're interested in any of those, I'm sure Victoria would be interested in talking to you about those organisations and the issues that we're talking about today and how they feature in those. So thank you. I won't take any more time up, Victoria. Thank you.
So I think my screen's frozen. Has it frozen?
No, we can see you and hear you very clearly.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Can you share your slides? You were going to share.
Well, apparently I can't, because Monica's just emailed. She put in the chat that she can't do it. Is that right? That I can't do it.
I think we kind of recheck and perhaps you can do it. Give it
I
a
can
try.
do it now.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Let me try now, because I sent them to you just in case. A minute. Everything's frozen on my screen at the moment, so you have to bear with me. Sorry. Oh, there we go. I'm back now. Okay. So sorry, everything froze on my screen, so that was the problem. Okay, let's have a look at this one.
If you feel, I can also share them because I have them if it's easier for you.
No, it's okay. Just give me
Okay.
just patience, just for a couple of seconds, and then I can do that for you. Brilliant. Can you all see that? Yes. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much again, and thank you, Andrea, for introducing me. I know I think I've got, is it 15 minutes, Andrea?
Yes, it's yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you want me to give you a warning?
I'm going to put my timer on.
Okay,
so
great.
that's what I'll do. Brilliant. Right, so thank you again. I'm going to start with, this is my outline, which I hope to be able to cover in a very short time. So I'm going to start off with a little bit about the history, so you can kind of position it where it stems from, and also why the use of the term, and then how it's used in one, everyday, and two, research. I think it's important to start with myself of why I was interested in intersectionality. I did women's studies many years ago. I also didn't come from, I'm not a Londoner, and I grew up in Somerset. So half my life was spent in Devon and Somerset. And I was also adopted by German Jewish parents from the age of 6 months. On top of that, they are also very upper class. So you can see just by the position of who I am, there was an intersectional aspect of being Black in a white space, very much out of my depth with class as well. And all those aspects around it. So that kind of gives you a little bit of who I am. Now, what has that got to do with the historical aspect of intersectionality? One of the things which I did smile when Andrea said, you know, I'm a little bit kind of outspoken on certain aspects of it. I'm very passionate about it, about gender and what that means. And we have to kind of go back to the historical aspect. So you can see on here, I've said why and how did the term develop? Well, Kimberly Crenshaw gets a lot of credit for developing the terminology, which was intersectionality, in 1989. And she did that along with other scholars who contributed to the advocated thinking critically about multidimensional aspects of women's oppression, along with gender, race, and class. And I think that's an important point to kind of hold on to. She is and was at the time a scholar. She was actually a practicing attorney, and she was looking at how the judge would be able to make a decision on women which she was representing, who were Black and women. And the judge could only see race and gender separately. And that in itself is really part of the historical aspect of intersectionality, is the oppression. And so when we see all the different its and bits and pieces around intersectionality, it's about the oppression and the structural oppression that we're dealing with. So some other people I would like to just introduce, if I may. I've put their names on here, but I'm just going to say a little bit about them. I would say really stemming from before Kimberly Crenshaw. Let me take you back a little bit. If we look at Sojourner Truth and who she was an enslaved individual who became a free slave. So she became a freedom person. And she went to the Women's Rights Convention in 1851. And she spoke up about the inequalities of being a Black woman who in society. And she really spoke up about the fact, of, you know, she's given birth, she's been treated in certain ways, people do not open the door or even give her a seat. And that's when she started off the speech with, which is a famous speech about "Ain't I a Woman?" And that's a really important point, which I will always come on to. Ain't I a woman? So for white women, they are be able to, people open the doors and they give them certain resources. But she said that way back in 1851. Now she couldn't write, so somebody did actually write the speech for her, which is another discussion which I haven't got time to go into now. So that's Sojourner Truth. This is just one particular person. You may also think about Harriet Tubman as another person who also looked at the intersection between women and also enslavement and what was going on there. Now, somebody else which you might recognize is Angela Davis. Now, I'm a very big fan of all of these. Angela Davis, of course, was a prominent political activist. They tried to silence her and threw her into prison for about 16 months at one stage. She was also part of the Black Panther movement, which you may have been aware of. You may have seen the most recent film about that and what that stood for. But on top of that, she advocated for women and race and class. And one of her publications, which is very well known, is Women, Race and Class. She's known for a whole range of different things, but she is really stands for women and what that looks like. And there's a whole range. I've missed out lots of people, but I can't put them all in. So Angela Davis is another person I think is really part of that discussion around intersectional, because within the civil rights movement where she was involved with, she did speak up about, well, what about women within what was going on within the civil rights movement? And she was very much at the front of what was going on. Another person which I think's an important voice is Audre Lorde, and who she was and what was going on with her. So she was somebody who was who's mixed race. She had 2 daughters and came out as a gay female and lived with her partner until she died. And she lived in Germany for quite a long time, but was born in New York. Now, she's very well known for her particular poetry, and she was definitely an activist. And she stood by the side of what it is to be a woman of color. And one of her famous publications was around Sister Outsider and what that meant, and also the poem Power. And she talked about the master's tools and dismantling the master's house. And she had many, many more publications as well. She's important because of the fact of being a mixed race individual. Also, she talked about her sexuality. And so I give that as an example of intersectionality. Now, somebody which you may be very familiar with, perhaps. Now, when I did my doctorate many years ago, when I did my master's actually on women's studies, and I referred to Bell Hooks, I was told that she was not scholarly enough. And that's an interesting terminology, because many people don't see the work of Black females who are feminists as scholarly. They may see them as an activist, but they poo-poo their theoretical understanding or concept regarding feminism. So I wasn't seen as that. But when I did my doctorate a few years later, they then questioned why I hadn't used, or no, not used, but I hadn't quoted Bell Hooks. So on one hand, it wasn't scholarly enough when I did my master's, which was a few years, about 6 years before. And then the other was 6 years or 7 years later, where they expected it to Bell Hooks to be able to come in there, because they then decided that she was scholarly enough. Bell Hooks, as many of you may have had known, again, she was an activist, very much American scholar, and she examined in depth the connections between race, gender, and class, very much very differently to how Kimberly did. I would say that Bell Hooks is really somebody who did a lot of that work. In her books, if you haven't picked them up at all, she has a whole range of books. But when I came from a white space and needed to start thinking about what was on there, I would pick up bell hooks, Angela, oh God, I can't think of it. I can't even think of her name now, but I'll come back to it in a moment. I'd pick up their books to start to read, to understand. And Sisters of the Yam particularly was working with a group of Black women. And that's when the whole concept of circular work with experiences and sharing stories was started with Sisters of the Yam with Black women. As you can see there, there's a book there which is called Ain't I a Woman? That's a book of hers where she talks about, again, the feminism, Black feminism, and what that means to be a Black woman. So that's bell hooks, and she deliberately spells it like that. So, you know, even though Google Scholar or whatever tries to put it as a big B, it's spelled like that. Maya Angelou, who I was trying to think about, I haven't put her on here neither, but I'm just thinking of people who deliberately used intersectional aspects of what they were doing. What else would I say about bell hooks? I think, you know, I'll leave it with that bit there. Somebody you may not know of is Gloria Weka. Now, she's also a mixed race individual who was brought up in Holland, and she's Afro-Sudanese. And that's an interesting grouping within the area there. She also focuses on sexuality and also Afro-Caribbean diaspora as well. And one of her books she's got is White Innocence, Paradoxes of Colonialism, which is written in a narrative form, very, very powerful and very interesting. And her other one is A Politics of Passion, Women's Sexual Culture. Now, I've given you some of the publications because I think it kind of positions the historical aspect of where we're moving through when we look at who's done this work. And another person which I wouldn't want to leave out, even though there's a lot of people, is Anne Phoenix. Now, I mention Anne Phoenix because of the fact that she is a scholar, and she does psychosocial analyses in relation to her work. She's based in the UK, so she's not coming from America, she's not coming from other parts of Europe, but she's based in the UK, she's a professor there. And she really looks at what's going on, and some of her work has been about masculinities, along with the issues of race and class. So she does a lot of work on that, and she's got a whole range of publications, all of them have. So thinking about the terminology, intersectionality, yes, it has been done and used and coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and we're aware of that. But I want you to also consider some of the other people which have been in there as well. Why the use of the term? Well, the term really came about because of oppression, coming from the roots, the grassroots of communities. Activism was something why the term was used, and the lived experience of what was going on top of that, the anti-Blackness. And I think that's something which we do need to have a conversation about when we're thinking about intersectionality. Because if you ask yourself which of the different areas of equality oppression do you feel less comfortable to speak about, that's when you find yourself being caught out. Because it might be easier to talk about A, B, and C, but it's not easy to talk about issues to do with race. Now, so how is it used? How is it used? And if I think about every day, how is it used every day? And also, how is it used in research? I know I've only got a few minutes left, and I will wrap up hopefully on time, definitely. So every day, the gender pay gap. We talk about the gender pay gap and how perhaps it may have shrunk for some, but it's shrunk mostly for white women. It has not shrunk for Black women at all. We're at the bottom of the pay gap. I think the only other people which are online with us are people which are from Bangladeshi background, which are women. Otherwise, it's Black women, not Black men at the bottom. Health and inequalities. Well, the recent report, which was buried by this government, regarding pregnancies and maternity care for Black women is horrendous. And that came out before the government was voted back in again, but it was buried and it came out again recently. Also think about the inequalities around health with COVID-19 and how Black women were looked in there, but we don't talk about that because we talk about women. The misrepresentation of what a Black woman is and how that in itself creates a demonized aspect of a stereotype of what a Black woman is. So it's okay to say the angry Black woman and laugh about it, even though that Black woman may not be an angry individual at all. And even if she was, how do you mix that up with passion and anger? Beauty and what that stands for, and who looks what does beauty mean? That in itself is part of the intersectional conversation that we do need to have as well together. Girlhood and Blackhood, girlhood and Black girlhood. Why have I put those two there? Because girlhood for white women goes on for longer. Girlhood for girlhood for white women goes on longer, but girlhood for white women, Black women, girls goes on for a short amount of time. And that is evident when we see Child Q, the young Black girl who was stripped naked at the same time as being on her period, and she was 15 years of age. And you ask yourself, why does that happen? Because they do not see young Black women as young girls. They see them as either as women, so they lose out on their girlhood, or as basically they dehumanize them as not being anybody which would be of interest in society. IT. You might think, well, why IT? The research around that. If you think about the algorithms and what's going on with that, the face recognition. For Black women, they have a bit of an issue because it doesn't pick up shadism and what that means. Very quickly, the last point is around the research. So how do we use that? I'm using it all the time. I use it as an approach, a method, and a theory. The theory may be connected with critical feminist theory, or it may be connected with whiteness theory, but it is in itself a development of a theoretical standpoint. The method itself, I really draw on a lot of work around narrative and how that works. And the approach, well, the approach itself is more a collective approach. And I really argue with people who just feel that theirs is more of a pure approach of doing research, because you're coming from a very white colonial way of thinking. So the last slide I've said on here is, so what next? Well, that's going to be part of the discussion. Hopefully that wasn't too quick, and I wanted to make sure that I was within time. Back to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Victoria. If anyone has any questions they would like to ask later, or questions of clarification, please do put them in the chat box. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Monica to introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victoria. I think I can recap from what you mentioned, like in this of bell hooks not being scholarly enough, and what is important, what is considered, and also like this theoretical, as a theoretical standpoint. I will connect this to our next speaker, who is Julena Carmona. She is part of an organization called Vegas Focal Cities, a network that is that investigates the shape of policies towards the informal workforce. She's originally from Venezuela and has spent the last 10 years of her life on the move, which sometimes these mobility and migration trajectories can also be a thing to consider within intersectionality. So her experiences as migrant motivated her to undertake a master's degree in migration studies, and she has specialized in gender studies at the National University of Mexico. As a South American feminist and queer activist, among others, Julena is actively involved in actions to decriminalize abortion in Latin America, Her specific interests are diverse and involve collective processes of organizing from the global south, from informal workers to indigenous forms of existence and resistance in defense of territory. Affectivity and identity, reconfigurations in migrations territories, the colonial feminist epistemologies. She also has a passion for languages, and she's a professional translator, Spanish, English, and French. And well, she offers also translation support. She will be, because she speaks English, she will be using English to communicate with all of us. And thank you very much, Elena, for joining us today. I think I'll pass the microphone so you can explain yourself what your panel will be about.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thank you very much for organizing this webinar, and to all of those of you involved in the organizing part. I'm also thanking Victoria for that brilliant presentation on the history of intersectionality. And I also wanted to thank the audience for being here today and for your interest. So I have some slides. Maybe I think Josie was going to show them.
You can see the slides now, right?
Excellent, thank you. So I will be very brief. I'm very aware of the time. What I'll go over today very briefly will be intersectionality as a theoretical framework for research, mostly for the most part. It would be followed by some of its impacts on the way we do research. And I will also mention some other decolonial feminist approaches that might be useful to think of along the way. And I will finally close the presentation with a thought-provoking video that might spark some questions about our role as researchers. If we move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So first of all, I wanted to start with a quote from a book that is called Methodology of the Oppressed by post-colonial feminist author Chela Sandoval. And it reads as follows. It says, the range of contemporary critical theories suggests that it is from those who have suffered the sentence of history, subjugation, domination, diaspora, displacement, that we learn our most enduring lessons for living and thinking. And it's by critical theorist Homi Bhabha. Now, you could probably tell I come from a background in migration studies from this quote, but the reason what I wanted to open this presentation with this quote is to illustrate the way, most particularly in social sciences, in anthropological studies, in feminist studies, that we as researchers, we are constantly looking at, analyzing, approaching, theorizing people. Some call them subjects or informants. I usually go with other alternatives, such as participants or interlocutors. But they're finally people that can be in very vulnerable situations and contexts that might be part of marginalized communities that are dealing with different types of oppression, discrimination, and violence. And so I would like to start from the fact that as researchers, we very frequently hold very asymmetrical encounters with our interlocutors, and that we are in many cases in far more privileged positions and social crossroads. And so in my case, for example, as a non-heterosexual migrant myself, looking at and studying non-heterosexual migrants in Latin America with very different backgrounds, I came to realize that the experiences of my interlocutors and my experiences of migration and borders were actually very distant. And at the end of the day, race, gender, sexuality, class, country of origin, educational background, and many other factors actually situated each one of us and our life experiences in very different crossroads. And this is where intersectionality comes in. And now, as Victoria was really brilliantly presenting and as coined by Black critical theorist Kimberly Crenshaw and others that fed her work, used as a theoretical framework, it can be understood as a prism or a kind of lens to actually name and grasp very complex social dynamics that actually where multiple forms of oppression, of inequalities, or what could even be considered disadvantages in today's world, come together and create multiple levels of social injustices that affect some people and create obstacles for some people, whereas for more privileged people, those obstacles will probably be never faced. And so using intersectionality and drawing from intersectionality as a framework for research can allow us to name inequalities and understand, as I said, very complex overlapping factors that end up reinforcing systems of oppression, power dynamics in very particular ways. So the idea, however, I would like to reiterate the fact that the idea is not just to add identity categories. So for example, migrants, I work with non-heterosexual migrants. So they were migrants with very varying citizenship status and access to papers, who identified as non-heterosexual. That implied a very varied way of identifying, from lesbian to queer to marica in Spanish, which kind of criticizes the LGBT kind of mainstream or more mainstream movement. And so it's not just adding identity categories to our analysis, but instead it encourages us to think critically about systems of oppression, as Victoria was saying. So what intersectionality, as well as other feminist theoretical frameworks, what they encourage researchers to do is to actually put on and nurture a critical eye towards power dynamics, towards systems of oppression, to think of the ways race and gender, for example, might collide and play out in our context of research, in institutions. It can allow us to name inequalities, to look closely at how violence materializes in social interactions, etc. So just to name a few examples. If we go to the next slide, thank you very much. And I would like to talk about how, regarding the impact on how we do research when we use these theoretical approaches that draw from feminism, from Black critical theory. I would like to highlight the way it can be actually highly problematic in some cases to use such analytical frameworks to legitimize the work we do on the oppressed, on people of color, on sexually diverse people, on alterity in more general terms. And why do I mean by this? And I think it is a vital impact from this kind of feminist lenses on the way we do research. I think has a lot to do with analyzing where inequalities, violence, and discrimination come from, but not only to show how they play out in what we are observing, but also on how they might be present in the way we do research, in the way we collect data, in the way we interact with the participants of our research. For example, in many cases, we might be using extractive methodologies. In other words, going into fieldwork, extracting the information we need without any further consideration, and then speaking about how intersectional our work is. So I think it is very necessary, and what I'm trying to do here is to think of, when using these approaches, to actually make ourselves uncomfortable questions constantly, questions about privilege, about race, about class, about gender, about sexuality, among many other factors. I think it is almost inevitable when we talk about intersectionality and when we use intersectionality in our research, it is inevitable to talk about white supremacy, about patriarchy, about colonialism, and understanding the ways these different systems operate and converge not only, as I said, in our context of research, but also the way they operate in ourselves as researchers, and what systems of oppression we might be perpetuating in all of the stages of our work. So if we go to the next slide, I thought, thank you very much. I thought it would be useful for this final part of the presentation to mention some of the theories that have informed and inspired my work in many ways, but particularly in this regard. And as I carried out my research project, it was more and more obvious that my readings of the context and the impressions and the analysis of other migrant trajectories, far from being neutral readings and far from being objective and truthful readings of the context, were actually very informed by my own background, my race, my gender, my sexuality, my history, and my experience. So an urgent need for questioning the traditional methods and practices that are present in academic settings actually arose at that time. And I kind of had to look into ways of questioning not only the principles of neutrality and objectivity, but also rethinking how to present, for example, my findings in a way that wouldn't victimize the participants that I was working with. How was I going to tell their stories without making it sound like they were just powerless agents, only oppressed by the structure, right? So I put some of the concepts and theories that actually helped me rethink these factors. One of them is the concept of situated knowledge by Donna Haraway. But there are other work as well from Gloria Alzaldúa, for example, or Spivak, from a Latin American lens. I put here Parini and Pons. But basically what they helped me do, and I can definitely share some of these references later on, what they helped me do was really rethink the way I was approaching different moments in my research. Among them, I could mention the way I approach fieldwork, for example, thought in different ways by some of these theories, not just as a place where we go and observe objectively a particular social issue, but as a process instead, where we are constantly affected by and affecting others. They were very key to remain critical to more traditional qualitative and ethnographic approaches that conceive researchers as distant figures or sometimes even invisible figures in fieldwork, in favor of more ethical and professional ways of studying alterity. They were very useful to think how my analysis was in fact not neutral, not objective, but actually included partial perspective or embodied objectivity, as opposed to finding a final truth through whatever method I was using. So I guess my invitation here is to constantly ask ourselves the question, what does it mean for me in my research, in my context of study, to actually nurture a critical eye as I go along, and how to actually look for ways and look for methods and theories that can actually open up a critical lens and encourage the use of a critical lens, as opposed to just adding identity categories without further consideration of systems of oppression, of racism, etc. So if we move on to the next slide, please. And as a way to conclude, and it's a very short video that we will watch, I wanted to close up with this performance that touches some of the ideas that I've briefly mentioned. And the idea behind it is definitely to spark conversation, to hear your reaction, and at the same time to encourage processes of self-reflection and questioning of these more traditional practices and methods that we find in academic settings. And please do keep in mind that it is a performance. It's a poet that I'm a very fan. I'm a big fan of. For many people, it could be too dramatic, and do bear in mind that it comes to the United States, so from a very particular context. But I'm really hoping here that it helps illustrate some of the ideas put forward. So let's see if you can play it, Monica, please.
Give me a minute. I'm just gonna share the directly YouTube video.
Whether your research
Can you hear it?
can inflict significant harm, and you will respond minor discomfort to expedite your review process. Her name is Kim, and the arch of her smile mirrors her painted on eyebrow. On Monday, she asks you what you did over the weekend. You do not tell her. You are guilty of the conversion rate, how you can afford a club, a skin, a language that she never will. She wants to know what it's like to grow up in the US if you have a boyfriend there who will buy you dinner. In your field preparation class, they will teach you the importance of obtaining consent. Kim cannot sign your consent. So instead, she communicates with the earnesty of hazel eyes, smiles, tells you how she used to let men and heroin inside of her and sometimes couldn't tell the difference. Class tells you how they used to beat her in men's prison. In your international field preparation class, they will teach you not to get involved in your subject's personal lives. Your palms are sweaty. Do not let them smear the ink, as she keeps smiling and encouraging you to ask this question. An aneurysm is a blood-filled bulge in the walls of blood. The amount of pressure increases, there's a significant risk of rupture, often resulting in death. A researcher is an ambitious distraction at the back of the brain. When the amount of information increases, there's a significant risk in epiphany, often resulting in a published paper. She will die 9 months after your interview, and you can still remember the scent of her smile once. Dear Kim, in America, I am learning how to think that I am better than you. In fact, I am majoring in you. Don't worry, they won't use your name. Keep it confidential, too. I am making a new theory out of your body. Don't worry, they will pay me to use you, I promise. I will cut you some of the profit in my acknowledgement 3. My thesis will be in English, and that language you learned watching reruns of Friends, Kim. Wish we could have been friends, just gotta keep it professional, I promise. I will publish my thesis in the widest paper I can find, so that they will believe the black in your words form. I will bury you in a library. I hope you will find peace there, that haunted house of quotation that hang on the shelves like skeletons. Listen to the recorded transcript. Feel her laughter all inside you. Spark under your burn that thesis in the flame. Try. We were too afraid to let people inside of us the fear of exposure. You have the story of a dead woman nested at the back of your throat, and you do not deserve it, dear Kim. What I really meant to ask you was, what theory did you use to stay warm at night? Is
Thank you very much, Monica. So I will leave it there, and please, if you do have any questions or comments, to put them in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yelena, so much for that participation. Well, perhaps I will try to link the video with our next speakers, were Camila and Emilia. So we'll be probably perhaps trying to talk more about doing research from within. And they have an approach which is like feminist, communitarian feminist approaches. And I think the project is really interested, and what they are trying to do is this hybrid between like these quotations, but trying to link it to the lived experiences. They have a project that perhaps can be considered more as activism, but it's also kind of communitarian. So I think it's really interesting to see how academia can be conversing at the same time with real experiences, and when it is time to perhaps not to get too involved into academia. So I will pass the word to Emilia and Camila, okay? And also perhaps contesting a little bit of what we saw in the video. We will not speak in English now. We will have Spanish and a little bit of indigenous language. But it is really difficult to kind of have like trilingual because of the time. But yeah, so I'm gonna share the slides. And Emilia, Camila, cuando quieran comenzar, me dicen. Ay, solo un minuto, estoy abriendo sus diapositivas. I will introduce you, but just give me a minute. I just want to share the slides. Everybody can see the slides now, right?
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todas quienes nos acompañan el día de hoy. Compartiremos la experiencia que nos llevó a escribir en colectiva, siendo nosotras mujeres artesanas masehualme y no escritoras ni académicas. Un trabajo el cual nombramos Tihuacente Quipacholi desde nuestra lengua materna, traducido en español como trabajo y cuidado colectivo entre mujeres, bordados que relatan de la vida de la mujer artesana indígena masehual del municipio de Hueyapan, Puebla.
Thank you very much. We are very happy to be here. We will be sharing today about our work in Hueyapan, Puebla. Our work is named Tihuacente Quipacholi, that means collective care and work among women, weaving the narrative of our life. We're going to share to you the experience of writing as Masewal artisan women rather than as writers or as professional academics.
Bueno, a manera de prólogo, entre hibridaciones de la sabiduría masehual y la académica, en este espacio compartimos nuestro trabajo, misma que no se centra en un referente con marcos teóricos. Más bien parte desde el punto de vista de la mujer artesana indígena masehual, respondiendo a las alternativas que dan pistas a resolver un problema en colectivo, en concreto y en común. Porque los conceptos y las teorías, como ya lo han dicho varias teóricas, principalmente feministas, que estas no están vacías, nacen siempre desde una realidad vivida, analizada y experimentada. Y desde estas realidades y la nuestra vamos encontrando conceptos como, por ejemplo, el feminismo, visión ontológica, de colonialidad, epistemología, contrahegemonía, y con ellas se intersectamos para cuestionarnos con los conceptos de eurocentrismo, racismo, colonialidad del poder, de género y del saber, mismas que nos interpelan para cuestionar, analizar, proponer, transformar nuestras realidades con hechos tangibles y en colectiva desde nuestro hacer como artesanas.
We are going to share to you our work that it's born between the hybrids of Masewal wisdom and the academia. This work is not centered or is not like limited by theoretical frameworks. It is born from the Masewal indigenous women that lives these realities and work together in a common and collective standpoint to really come with a tangible solution to the problems that are identified in the day-to-day life. And it's really coming from the experience of these women. So the feminist theories that we are going to share to you are created from the spirit, from the nucleus, from the living of them. So From this life, the concepts that are born are feminist, ontology, decolonialism, epistemology, counter-hegemony, intersectionality, Eurocentrism, racism, coloniality of power, gender and knowledge. But there are not, there are concepts that are put together from these perspectives and not like from an outside point of view, put into the collective.
Bueno, y antes que nada, compartimos con ustedes que para nosotras como artesanas y Masehualme, el bordado es una forma de escritura donde registramos y transmitimos la sabiduría ancestral de nuestra cosmovisión indígena, en especial nuestra relación con la naturaleza y la humanidad, con puntadas encaminadas a un mensaje del Yecnemilis, vivir en dualidad desde el imaginario co-construido, enfocado a posibilitar un buen vivir equitativo y equilibrado para todas y todos, en donde enunciamos desde estas otras formas de escritura, combinándolas con las académicas, en este espacio con ustedes, que es la sabiduría Masehual, quiénes somos nosotras, por qué nos llamamos de esta forma y no de otra, siendo nosotras chihuis, de dónde somos y de dónde somos las mujeres artesanas del municipio de Guayapan, Puebla. Y por último, ¿qué hacemos? ¿Cómo caminamos contrahegemónicamente a las imposiciones raciales, patriarcales y de género?
For us as Masewal artisan women, our way of writing is through embroiderment. Through this, we can share the wisdom of our ancestors and the knowledge of the Masewal indigenous people. We walk against the hegemonic understanding of racial patriarchy and gender impositions. Embroidery, it's a form of writing that can help us transmit our cosmovisions, not only to the outside world, but most important to our younger generations, because it's a wisdom that is shared from the grandmother to the mother and then the daughters. And the most important message that we want to share through this embroiderment is the concept of Yecnemilis, that it's a Masewal indigenous concept that wants to share how to live in this duality, always looking for the good living, but taking into account the relationship between people, but between nature and all that surround us, because these are living entities that share with us and that sustain life, but this from an emotional point of view, not from an utilitarian point of view. So we walk always thinking on this question that is, what is Masewal wisdom? Who are we? Why are we named Chiwik? And where are we from? Oh, I'm sorry, I think Emilia froze. Emi?
Perdón, se había bloqueado. Digo, ¿qué es la sabiduría Masewal? Compartimos con ustedes cosa que es muy importante. Cuando nosotras hablamos de la sabiduría Masewal, partimos de la cultura, aprendiendo de nuestras antecesoras. Nos referimos principalmente a la forma de las madres, mismas que aprendieron de nuestras abuelas y nuestras abuelas de sus madres. Una vida que está fuertemente vinculada con el cuidado mutuo entre seres. ¿Sí me escucho, Cam?
Sí, sí te escuchas. Si quieres, Emi,
Bueno.
podrías quitar tu cámara. Tu voz está bien, pero la imagen es la que se congela. I think Emilia is having technical issues. She's asking me if I can continue so her internet can come back. What she was saying is that Masewal knowledge it's a way of living. It's not an outside theory that it's formed and that it's like separated from the day-to-day life. It is born from the day-to-day life and the activities that come with them. But most important from the perspective that indigenous people have about relationship, because the most important way of transmitting knowledge is through generations, what I was telling you in the last slide, from grandmothers to mothers and granddaughters. And it is strongly linked to the mutual care between women, men, and natural entities that goes around, because in these indigenous communities, the nature is not something that it's there for our use. It is there for our common sharing of Mother Earth. And it's like, it's very specified that it comes more between the relationship, because it's like the earth is our mother, but the river is our brother, and the trees are also our siblings, because we have a relationship with them. It's an emotional link. So it goes beyond what they can give to us, and more that is it has to maintain an equilibrium. So the vision of life, it's centered in this conservation of life in any form. So the most important thing is to care, the caring of this relationship in the way that so we can all coexist in the land and earth and with our common mother. Well, who are we inside CHIWIC? We are an intercultural cooperative. We are artisans, students, professionals, girls, young women, ladies of the municipality of Hueyapan, Puebla in Mexico. But together, we come together to color our life with different pigments of joy, of sadness, of dreams, of memories, and we invite each other to see ourselves as living knowledge. We have a concept inside the cooperative that it's bibliotecas vivientes, that is like living libraries. This means that everyone has something to share. It doesn't matter the context or the education that she has. She's someone of value that just for being here has something very important to bring to the collective. So we honor the individuality of each other, like me, that I come from Mexico City and that I'm part of the group. And I know I have something to share, but I also know that I have a lot to learn from everybody. So that's the way that we see each other. It's like an ecosystem where everyone has a special place because it's a special someone, and owning your individuality is what nurtures the collective. Well, why are we named CHIWIC? CHIWIC means in Nahuatl bordado, that it's embroiderment. And we are named this way because embroiderment, it's the most important way of indigenous Masewal women for sharing knowledge between generations, but also because embroiderment brings together so many points. It brings together nature through the designs. It brings together generations. It brings together the traditions of the people. It is a portrait of the way of living inside Hueyapan. So we also named CHIWIC, this cooperative CHIWIC, because what we want to do is to connect to other women and men in other parts of the world through these embroiderments. The way of embroiderment in this community and the pieces that are created, it's a narrative that helps us share with the world what the day-to-day life is inside these communities and how it's the life of the indigenous women, especially inside Hueyapan. We all walk in different horizons, but we share this space to accompany us and teach each other better ways of live, better ways to relate between us and between men. And we try to create a different story from ourselves and from the coming generations, to differ from the one that are imposed, to differ from what it has been taught women should be acting on, or should be doing, or should be behaving inside their families, inside the community, and inside these spaces where women, and especially indigenous, has been left out, especially in academia. So Emilia, being an indigenous woman who can who could have access to the academia and to education to this level, she's opening the space for other women behind her so they can achieve to have access to these spaces too. Where are we from? Well, Chiwik is born in Huayapan, Puebla, in Mexico. These highlands, these are called the Northern Highlands in the state of Puebla, very near to Veracruz. This place is called the cradle and pinnacle of the embroidered shawl. Masewal women are found in fields, in Cautem. I'm sorry, my Nahuatl is not very good, so I may mispronounce the words, but in the Cuauhteme, with the plants, with the animals. Emi, you're back.
Perdón por interrumpir.
No,
Hablamos
sigue.
lenguas, entonces ahí es entre los Cuauhtame, traducido en español, en los montes mesófilos de montaña, que igual emana nuestra vida con las plantas, con los animales, con las deidades, con los tamatinime, con los cuidanderos y cuidanderas de los espacios sagrados, con los nacimientos de agua, pero sobre todo con nuestra madre, la tierra.
We are found in the fields, in the Cuauhtame, that are the forest, where you can find the plants, the animals, the deities, the water, the springs, the tamatimines that are the guardians of these sacred places, and all over the Mother Earth.
Bueno, y en este sentido del qué hacemos, en nuestros procesos productivos, en nuestros talleres, en los encuentros y convivencias o reuniones, recapitulamos, analizamos y reflexionamos sobre la cosmovisión indígena Masehual, cuidado del ser y del medio ambiente, la economía solidaria y dinámicas de vida para deconstruir en nuestras existencias el pensamiento dominante y aplastante para las mujeres y mujeres indígenas, proponiendo alternativas para liberarnos y sanarnos.
What we do in our productive process, we come together and we analyze and reflect upon the Masehual indigenous cosmovision, and how do we take care of each other and the environment, and how do we move through a solidarity economy and the dynamics of life, so we can propose new ways of being, new ways of relate between each other, and deconstruct the dominance and overwhelming often. I'm sorry, I'm going to hide this because I can. The way that we relate between each other and the environment, so we can propose a new ways and new alternatives from healing and free ourselves.
Compartimos esta diapositiva solo para ver lo que pueden encontrar en nuestras redes, pero en ella, en este encuentro también compartimos con ustedes que las mujeres en estos espacios nos vemos obligadas a buscar estrategias y trabajos alternativos que sean remunerados económicamente por muchas razones. La principal es porque como mujeres, siendo las principales responsables de nuestros hogares, debemos de administrar los ingresos con demasiada cautela, para poder cubrir otro tipo de necesidades, necesidades de las cuales las mujeres somos las que vemos principalmente.
We have to find ways so the cooperative can have a economic sustainability, because women are the ones who are in charge of the families in the reproductive activities, but they also have to manage to find productive activities that can help bring well-being to the family, because when the man is the one in charge of the money, women have to be really administrative of the little money that comes through the family, and they are in a way in slavery of men because of this link with money. So having their own money means freedom.
Enfrentamos esto en sororidad, interesándonos por la otra, creando espacios seguros y llenos de la mano en estos espacios, fortaleciéndonos con el concepto de género.
We all join in sorority to work together and to walk hand by hand, so we can create safe spaces where we can develop new solutions for sustaining our life.
Esta diapositiva ya la compartimos a grandes rasgos, entonces nos pasamos a la siguiente. También nos permitimos redescubrirnos y defender al cuerpo como territorio y al territorio como espacio, y de esta manera poder compartir con confianza de lo que nos pasa a cada una de nosotras, animándonos a defender aquello que han querido arrebatarnos por años, nuestra integridad, exponiéndonos a nosotras mismas para romper el silencio y deconstruyendo realidades y discursos impuestas, contribuyendo a un acto de despatriarcalización y decolonización, como ya lo menciona Lorena Carvajal en su texto, el relato de las violencias de mi territorio cuerpo-tierra.
We join so we can rediscover ourselves, and we can defend our body as a territory, as our territory and our space. So through this process of reflection, we can break the silence and can expose what every woman has been living in their own lives. And so we can change the narrative and deconstruct these impositions from patriarchy.
Con todo esto, desde nuestro desconocimiento y desde todo lo aprendido desde nuestra cultura y la sabiduría académica, actualmente nos consideramos que somos fuerza, inteligencia y amor, y entonces invitamos a muchas otras mujeres que viven nuestras realidades y las que no, a romper juntas el cascarón imaginario que nos ha contenido desde siempre.
From this knowledge that comes from the symbiosis of academics and Maceual knowledge, we consider ourselves that we are strength, that we are intelligence, and that we are love. And we want to invite other women in other places that are living the same situations as we do in our community to come and join us and to break their own silence so we can change the system.
Con este espacio y por habernos co-construido juntas, compartido el día de hoy, Namechtazokamatilia, les agradecemos. Muchas gracias.
We thank you a lot for this space, for helping us co-create between all of us. And we're very happy to be here. And Tlazohkamatik, that means thank you in Nahuatl.
Thank you very much, Camila and Emilia. And yeah, I think at the end we've managed with all of the technical issues. We will pass now to the question and answers. We already have some questions. Josie is going to be handling the questions. But if you want to ask the questions directly, you can always let us know in the chat box, or just open, well, Josie might be indicating you if you can open your microphone or invite you to participate. Thank you very much, Cami, Emilia, Julena, and Victoria for your speech. I know that it involved a lot of work, and thank you very much for sharing all of your knowledge and for being here today, regardless of any connectivity issues. And or yeah, anyways, thank you so much. And I'll pass the microphone to Joseph.
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions. Keep them coming in. I've got one that was sent to me directly for Victoria. Actually, there's two kind of similar ones. So I'll say this one and I'll ask the other person to say their kind of similar one. It's about the gender pay gap. So someone's just asked, said, I've always wondered about how they calculate the gender pay gap for Black women. Do they add them together or multiply them? Does anyone know how that works, about how it's calculated? And then Naveen has also asked a question about the gender pay gap. Would you like to say that out loud, or do you want me to say that, Naveen? No, okay, I'll say that one out loud as well. So it says, when you made reference to the gender pay gap and suggested it suggested Bangladeshi women being most disadvantaged, what are your thoughts about when you layer the experiences with disability? So just two questions about the gender pay gap, Victoria.
All right, thank you. I'll start with the gender pay gap with both of them. The one, when we're looking at the bottom of the pay scale, it's Black women and then followed by Bangladeshi women. If we then look at disability, if you're saying disability and also Black women, well, at the present moment, they haven't really got the, they haven't got a intersectional breakdown of what that looks like for women which have a disability and are Black. But what they do know is that if you have a disability, you will be very far down the pay gap, depending on your disability. And I think that's an important point to know. So the answer to your question is they haven't done an intersectional analysis of the pay gap, which includes disability. And when they were looking at this, there was some research done across, I think, the West. It was Bristol University and the other one, which is kind of, I can't think what it's called, but I think it's West or whatever it is, University of the West, and another university, which I think was Cardiff. All three of them did the work on, there was a European project on pay gap, and it was also linked to the government as well. And I was at that meeting when they were disseminating the research data, and I raised the issue about intersectionality, and they hadn't even considered the intersectional approach. So that answers that particular question. The first question about the pay gap, when one first hears where the position of Black women are on the bottom, it's kind of quite tough, because on the one hand they are seen as achievers in school, but on the other hand they are not actually receiving the kudos they require regarding the money. So the challenges around that and how they divide it, well, universities haven't quite got their heads around it, because they talk to you about the gender pay gap and they talk about what they're doing for the ethnicity pay gap, but they can't connect the two between women which are Black in that pay gap. So there's a lot more work to be done on that. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, great. Is there anyone who wants to come back on, who asked those questions? Anyone want to come back and ask anything more? No? Okay. I've got one for Yelena here. It's about participatory research. So it says participatory research seems appropriate as a way to reflect with others while doing research. Have you incorporated those approaches in your work, or do you know an example in which it was possible to reflect over the role as researcher?
Thank you very much, Josie, for reading the question out loud, and thank you, Ana Lucia, for your question. Definitely for, I think, participatory research, depending on your context and what you are looking at specifically, I think it proposes definitely a path that opens up possibilities as opposed to limiting them. So yes, I think it is definitely a possible way of reflecting with others. What happened in my case, and some of the work I had to do, because participatory research also has all these different biases regarding colonialism and racism, and because at the end of the day, many of the methodological approaches that we use in academic settings are still informed by all these different systems of oppression and end up perpetuating oppression towards vulnerable groups. And so something interesting that really helped me think this out was the work of Alba Pons. She's Spanish, but she lives and works in Mexico. And what she did, she actually shifted the participatory observation methodology. She did an interesting twist and turn it into observatory participation to actually highlight the way we as researchers, and finally the work we do, is inevitably informed by our views and are therefore not objective, but are partial, like a very, in a way that recognizes our role and the results and everything that constitutes the work we produce at the end of the day is informed by our own subjectivity. And so what she does was a twist. What she did was a twist of the participatory observation methodology, and she twisted into observatory participation with that objective. I also am a big fan of the work of Vasilakis as well, from Argentina. She also does a very deep critique of the role of the researcher, of the interview as a method that can again be perpetuating many of the systems of oppressions that we're actually trying to detangle. And so in my case as well, the interview as a method, as well as the life story, for example, to tell the trajectories and the experiences of my interlocutors, they were actually very limited when it came to actually putting into paper all the, I'm going to talk about affectivity, all the other factors and the tissue that also informs the work we do. So in the interview, far from trying to be this distant figure from my interlocutors, what I tried to do was actually create a different environment. And so the interview as a method was actually very limited for me. So what I did also, drawing from the work of Pons, was to conceive the encounter with the interlocutor more as an effective encounter, more than just a distant or an objective interview. So those are, I think, maybe ideas that can help you think of participatory research in a way that is actually critical of all the biases that are very present in the work we do as researchers. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Elena. We've just had a question that's been asked in Spanish. I'm going to get Monica to read and translate that one out. Okay.
Yeah, I think more than a question, it was a comment, but perhaps Emilia would like to elaborate a bit, because she mentioned this of the bibliotecas vivientes, or like the alive libraries. And I'm going to pass the word to Emilia, and then probably I will help with the translation because Camila had to leave. So, Emilia, can you hear me? Emilia, ¿me escuchas? Perdón, se me cruzó el cable. Ok. Sí, si nos puedes comentar un poco más de eso, de entenderse como ser que las mujeres son bibliotecas vivientes y esa manera de compartir la sabiduría intergeneracional.
Bueno, como en un principio les compartimos, nosotras, las mujeres artesanas, escribimos la mayoría de nuestra sabiduría a través de los bordados, pero desde esta otra concepción en donde nos vemos obligadas a vivir y habitar desde una forma de vida completamente distinta. Nos hemos dado cuenta que generacionalmente se ha perdido muchas cosas, como por ejemplo nuestra lengua, nuestra cultura masegua, que emana desde esta visión dual, en donde no se mira como a la mujer como cosa o como a la naturaleza como cosa, en donde nos fuimos dando cuenta que poco a poco hemos ido siendo devoradas. Entonces, a todas nuestras hermanas, compañeras artesanas, nos invitamos para compartir esos saberes que lentamente van desapareciendo, van quedando enterradas, para compartirnos entre nosotras mismas y compartir con las nuevas generaciones de esas cosas que no se encuentran escritas, que simplemente se encuentran desde la memoria, desde las prácticas de remembranza y desde toda esa forma de escribirla desde nuestros textiles artesanales.
Okay, that was a very long phrase, so I'll try to make my best to summarize and to pass the message. So pretty much Emilia is saying as artisan women, they try to put all of the wisdom from ancestors into the embroiderments and into the women's, because they have been forced to live in the world we live now, and therefore they have been distanced, like generally, like the language has been lost, like the indigenous language, the Masegua culture, and like how they conceive the worlds. So for instance, women and nature are perceived most of things that have been devoured, they have been eaten. And that's why they find through weaving and through embroiderments a way to share knowledge among themselves as women, but also to other generations. And that's like a way to kind of have remembrance, memories, and like to consider people as this kind of living libraries, because they keep the knowledge that does not exist in other sources, in other books, in the language that has been lost. I tried my best. Yeah.
I think you want to go. If we can end with one final question that's kind of imposed to everyone on the panel, if that's okay. So it says, I wonder if intersectionality is flexible enough to potentially contain so many different subjectivities, race, gender, class, sexuality, disability, migrant status, etc., while also retaining its coherence as an analytical framework. Do the panel think it is a stronger theoretical approach for some combinations of multiplicities over others? Can we start with Victoria, is that right?
Thanks, Josie. I was just writing a response to that as well. Anna, I think that's a really, really interesting question. And I think it starts with one as a researcher. One has to look at their own positionality. I think it's very, very difficult to put one against the other. So for me, and I'll make it very simple, if you're doing research and you know your own research, if you're doing research or you have an interest in doing a piece of research on, for example, women, and women in, I don't know, women in maternity wards, for example, right? And you're very interested and you start talking to women which are in maternity wards, and you realize you've got the same type of women, but you may not realize that because it hasn't come to your surface of your mind. Now, to add an intersectional dimension to that, you'd want to kind of get a different aspect of women. Now, of course, you may have all white women as an example, but you then might want to look at the class of what's going on with those women as an example to add to that. And of course, the visibility of somebody who is not white has to be included in that discussion about maternity. Because if it's not included in that discussion, if you were looking at women which are having experiences in the maternity ward, an example, then you've only got a one dimension of what's going on. Now, the question around where you can't do multiple different equalities, well, we're not asking you to. That's not what it's about. It is about the structural aspect of oppression. And one of the structural aspects of oppression, no matter what anybody says, is that if you are non-white, you will find that the system will be against you in all different ways, the structural aspects of what's going on. Whether you're from Mexico, whether you're from Southeast Asia, whether you're from East Asia, whatever it is, if you're not white, the system at some stage will do what they need to do with you. And I think that's the key which you have to to look at, and you have to really be comfortable with that. So you can do research, you can do fantastic first-class research without even thinking about the intersectional aspect of your research. But I think it's timely because people will discredit your research if you have not looked beyond one particular thing. So if you're looking at disability, are you collecting the voices of people which are not looking like yourself? So hence disability which has the voices of Black or LGBTQ plus, or other mixes within that. So it's how you position it and how you use it as a standpoint. No one's asking you to have 10 different standpoints. That would not help, but you do need to kind of consider what are you looking at, and how do you then start to consider some variables to be able to answer the question. I hope that's helpful. I put a load of different possible definitions to draw on intersectionality as well for people to help.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I was asked Elena if you've got anything to add to that quickly. Okay.
Really nothing to add, just to reiterate what Victoria was saying, because I feel that, as I said, as part of the presentation, it is really important to actually make ourselves uncomfortable questions and actually look at the ways the systems of oppression operate and materialize, and the effects of that more global or more structural power has in local and more individual or collective approaches. And so I feel that it is definitely an important step, even if it doesn't make it to written paper. I think it is an important exercise to actually ask ourselves about our interests, why the intentions behind the work that we do, why are we researching a particular question and a particular group of people, what are the motivations behind that work. Even in my case, I decided to actually position myself very clearly on the work I did, because for me it was important, and it actually fed the work that I did and the way of analyzing what I was looking at in very particular ways. But at the same time, even if it doesn't make it to the final paper, I do think it's very important to actually have and carry out that exercise, especially when we're talking about using feminist and critical race theory approaches.
Thank you, Yelena. I think Emilia also wants to comment on this. Emilia, ¿qué querías comentar?
Bueno, aportando desde esta pregunta, compartimos desde esta realidad que vivimos, que por ejemplo para nosotras, varios conceptos ni siquiera nos eran relevantes. Pero desde esta realidad de vida intentamos desmenuzarlos y con ello intentamos llevarlos a una realidad. Luego sigue la otra parte que quiero comentar.
Okay, so first this part is this like, to start with, she feels like what they're trying to do is to work on lives that are realities, that are experienced, and sometimes they kind of notice that there were concepts that were not even relevant to kind of relate and to describe their lives. So what they try to do is to kind of those real lives, to kind of like break them into pieces and to kind of work on them. And that's the second part that she's going to comment now. Emilia, la segunda parte.
Entonces, para nosotras, interseccionalidad es un concepto en donde existen muchas ideas de muchos mundos.
Okay, so for them, intersectionality, it is mainly a concept where there are different ideas, of different worlds.
Pero el concepto como tal, si no se lleva a una realidad y solo se discursa, queda solo como concepto, por más que la intención interpele y habite a muchas.
Okay, so, but the concept, if it is not kind of brought to a reality, it just stays as a good intention. And so, yeah, I'm kind of changing, I'm paraphrasing here a bit. So the important part is to bring this concept to reality and to live the experiences. Gracias, Emilia.
Okay, I think we have to draw to a close now because we've come to the end of our time. But wow, that was a really rich session. Thank you so much to all our speakers, Victoria, Yelena, Emilia and Camelia. Really, really wonderful talks. I'm sure people could go on asking you questions for a long time. And it kind of, I think it really raised our awareness of how important and prolific the concept of intersectionality is and should be for us as researchers. We hope that, I think the historical dimensions, both from the perspective that Victoria talked about and that Emilia was talking about and Camilla were talking about in relation to different cultures is absolutely fascinating, and that we could have talked about lots of different things for a long time. And the way we started to pick at methodology, I think, was very nicely will lead on to the next session, which I think Brian, who I can see here, is involved in the Feminist seminar series for SWDTP, because we seem to be moving to be thinking about the shortcomings of some of the more traditional research methods and what we might need to do in order to build intersectional knowledge, perhaps, that would help us. So thank you everybody for participating, and particular thanks to Monica and Josie and the Southwest Doctoral Training Partnership, who've done a fantastic job of supporting us to create this session. And I really hope we can get to come back to this topic at some point.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Andrea, Josie, and Monica for convening this, as well as to our speakers, Jelena, Victoria, Emilia, and Camelia. I think, yeah, we're unfolding, or we're arriving at some really important questions. I think some really important questions for universities, for academia as well, and for what we make possible and support in the terms of PhD research. So, I hope we can have some conversations, Andrea, as you're suggesting, that go forward from this. I don't know whether there's anyone here, maybe Andrea, who can in the chat just write, or Victoria, there was some interest in the networks and associations that you mentioned, Andrea, when you were introducing Victoria. And I think that people here who are just beginning or exploring the possibility of doing research on gender or using feminist perspectives or with intersectionalities or a combination, who might find it useful to know about some of the networks and that they could, or associations that they could be engaging with. So that'd be much appreciated. As I said, we'll have some news coming up shortly about the next webinar in this series, which will be focusing on methodologies. I'm just going to leave everything open. Oh, thank you, Victoria, for all those acronyms. That's brilliant. I'm going to just leave this channel open, although we've finished the event, just so that people can kind of capture that information if they want to about the associations. Thank you very much. We'll stop the recording at this point, though.